Feeding our babies is supposed to come naturally. We see images of cooing babies and smiling moms and doting grandmas and expect that to be us. We don't see all the struggle that goes into every decision that seems so high stakes at the time. We don't expect all the leaking, the engorgement, the deciding to take a break. We don't expect all the judgment, whether we breastfeed or bottle feed or pump or don't. Or maybe we do expect all those things and it comes smooth sailing. But what I have encountered as a doula, a childbirth educator, and a lactation professional is that when I tell people what I do, the stories flow out naturally. And I love hearing them. I hope you do too. I'm your host, Lo. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I started the Milk Making Minutes because I'm passionate about supporting breastfeeding people. But more importantly, I knew that hearing real people tell real stories would benefit both the storytellers and the listeners. I had this idea for 3 years before I launched. I asked so many people how I should begin, and Anchor came up repeatedly as the easiest way to launch a podcast. And I have not been disappointed. If you are passionate about a topic and have wanted to start a podcast, you can use Anchor to record and distribute your podcast. It's easy to use. You can use the editing tools right from the platform. You can distribute your podcast episodes seamlessly to listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts right from Anchor. And the best part is, it's free. And the tech support has been great too. Go to anchor.fm or download the app right to your phone to get started on your great podcast idea. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I'd love to have you start out just by introducing yourself and your family and telling us a little bit about, just yourself and your family would be good.
My name is Laura. My husband is Eric. We've been married almost 10 years, and we have 3 kids. The 2 oldest are girls. They're 7 and 5, and my son is 2.
Great. Good. So you have a handful of baby feeding experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Great. I can't wait to hear about them. So before we get right into the baby feeding experiences, can you tell me a little bit about what your exposure was to breastfeeding? Are those terms you use, breastfeeding and nursing, or do you prefer other terms?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what we say.
Okay.
They were, the first was hard. I would say the first was definitely the hardest to get used to. And we did have a lactation consultant come in, because I remember just being in so much pain, and my poor husband just looked at me with those eyes that say, I have no idea what to do right now. Yeah, they were all different. The second one was easier, and then the third, he needed formula for a little bit. Because he wasn't having enough wet diapers, so we had to give him a little tube. But all in all, everybody made it through fine, and I ended up breastfeeding him I'm still nursing my son, so I seem to do it for at least around 2 years, or until I get pregnant again.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So before we get into the details of that, did you know other people who breastfed before you had a family? Had you seen it?
I did. I was among the first of my friends to have kids, so I only had 2 friends that did, and one of them was very private about it, but the other one she was so helpful, and I try to be like her when I have, new mom friends, because it is really hard. And she was just like, call me whenever you're going to have those moments where you just want to give up, or you just want to cry or yell or do something, and call me, I'm here. And it was nice to know that I wasn't alone, because it can be very isolating.
Of course. And what about your family culture?
I'm adopted.
Uh-huh.
So, I was never nursed.
Yeah.
And it was never really, discussed. I think around that time too, it was more formula was the way to go at that time. It was seen as the better alternative, whereas, you just feed your baby the way you feed your baby.
Right.
But there was definitely that push, I think, when I was a baby that, 4 months away ago, and I didn't have a choice. I mean, I was adopted, so.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's really interesting. I haven't had a guest on the podcast yet who themselves was adopted.
Hmm.
My husband was adopted,
Oh,
and yeah, so and both he and his brother were adopted. So I've talked with my mother-in-law about this pretty extensively. But what was that like for you when it came time to be planning your own family and to be thinking about how you were going to feed your baby and to be thinking about um, the choices you were going to be making there and wanting, typically we look first to our family for support, although not always, because sometimes our families aren't the people we want to get the answers from. But what was that like for you as someone who had been adopted, um, as you were thinking about these questions about feeding your babies?
it was interesting because I would say, like, my whole life it was just kind of, you're adopted and that's just part of you and that's kind of it. And then when I was
Mm,
pregnant and, had my baby, it was a lot more, wondering about my biological family. Like,
mm.
did my birth mom, have horrible morning sickness? Did she have a hard time nursing? Like, I was one of, I think I was the seventh child that she had.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I was like, what was her experiences like? How did she do this? Like, I was on my first
Yeah.
struggling, like, how did this woman make it that far? And it really made me think about her and, other family members I might have a lot.
Yeah, that is so touching. My husband had those same experiences, different because he wasn't thinking about feeding a child and he wasn't carrying a child, but my children were his first biological family that he had, our children. And so
Yeah.
it did make him think about his other biological family more than he had ever before.
Yeah, it was definitely like I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it before then, and then after it
Mm-hmm.
was definitely in the forefront. Or even like my oldest daughter looks just like me, and
Mm,
I've my the rest of my adopted family, I we couldn't be more opposite. Like, I don't look like any of them, so it was interesting
mm-hmm.
to have somebody in my life. It it touched me differently than I expected.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your story.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so when you were, thinking about feeding your babies, you said you had one friend who had gone through it before. Did she talk to you while you were pregnant about baby feeding and about the challenges that she had?
I think she just was kind of just letting me know that it was going to be tougher than it looked.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't. She was more like emotionally, like, if you need things, kind of, as opposed to like when the baby does this, you do this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
she kind of was like, don't even really bother with the nursing classes because you're not going to know until you are in the moment.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, so I mean,
Yeah.
hers was she just wanted to make sure that I was going to be okay after in that
Yeah.
the fourth trimester kind of time.
Yeah. So then did you set goals for yourself during your pregnancies, either the
I
first time or then subsequently when you were planning for other babies
I
for your
did.
siblings?
I really wanted to be able to nurse, and it was just something that was important to me.
Hmm.
Um, and my goal at first was, I think it was 6 weeks, and then it was like, if
Okay.
I hit that, I'll try 6 months, and then
Okay.
if I hit that, I'll try for a year,
Uh-huh.
and then I think the year came, and it was, I think she was 18 months when I got
Uh-huh.
pregnant again.
Okay.
And so then I was like, well, I guess we're done here.
Okay.
I'm
And
not going to
why
nurse two
those
babies.
Yeah, and why those numbers? Why 6 weeks and then 6 months and then a year?
I
Why
just
did you have
wanted
those
I
numbers?
wanted to start with something small that seemed attainable. I knew if I
Mm-hmm.
said a year or bust, it would just be disheartening.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to start off
Yeah.
feeling like I failed.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
even
And
like,
so then,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, no.
Oh, I was just gonna say, even within those first few weeks, like my husband was telling me, because I was in tears, like he had washcloths on my neck because I was just in so much pain, and he was telling me, he's like, give them formula, give her a bottle, like why won't you do it? And it was just something, I don't know if it's hormonal, new mom, what it was, but there was something in me, I just wouldn't do it.
Mm,
And obviously, looking back, I would tell myself, oh my goodness, feed your kid and take a rest, like let your
mm-hmm,
body heal and just give your kid formula or just make sure they're
mm-hmm.
fed. But at the time, you're so in it, and if you have a goal, that's the only thing you see.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
obviously makes sense now. Like, yeah, obviously, just take a break. You know,
Right.
take a break for a feeding. You're feeding every hour and a half, so it'll be fine if you take a break or two. But in the
Mm-hmm.
moment, it just didn't feel like an option. It felt like failure.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that that one friend told you, skip the classes. You just have to, you won't know until you're doing it. But was there anything that you did to prepare to meet that first initial 6 week goal as you were preparing to have your children?
I mean, I read all the normal basic baby books, all the like what to expect kind of stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
had all the pillows and the creams, and like my one friend was like, "Oh, make sure you get, like the ice packs," and I made sure
Mm-hmm.
I had all that stuff. But I mean, in the end, like there's no way other than just, jumping right in with both feet. I mean, the kid's there, you gotta do something.
Right, exactly. Okay. Okay. So, uh, I want to know so much about what feeding was actually like, but if you could give us a brief synopsis of the birth experiences, because we know that has an impact on feeding. Um, so you don't have to go into all of the details, but um, because this is not a birth centered podcast, but what were those birth experiences like for each of your children?
They were all different. My first, I had a doula,
Mm-hmm.
and she made all the difference in the world. It was just, it was the best of the three. Um, it was the longest, but it was only still 11 hours. It wasn't long by
Mm-hmm.
by any means. But it was just having her was just a lifesaver, and I highly recommend it if you can afford it. It was just super helpful, and it was just smooth as can be. Like it was just ideal, nothing wrong. I even had my doctor, which isn't always the case. So it was just
Mm,
as perfect as you could imagine. I was very
mm,
fortunate.
mm,
The second one, and they were all at different hospitals. The
mm,
second one, she was sunny side up. She was the longest of the three, and we didn't have a dual. Like I went into this one thinking, as everyone does with their second, I think, or I did with my second, I would say, I got this. I've done this once before. Second kid's gonna be fine. We can figure it out. No, I didn't play it well. I stayed in the shower too long, and then I was groggy, and then my it was tougher than I thought it would be. I thought going in like I knew everything, and I didn't have drugs either of those times. I wanted to have it natural. Like I can do
mhm,
this. I know what it's like. It'll be fine. And it was harder. I've had a harder
mm,
time than the first.
mm,
And
mhm,
she ended up being a harder baby too. It was just the second
mm,
was all around just so much more difficult. And then my son, my third child, his I asked for drugs immediately after doing two natural, and it didn't work by the time I got it. So that was kind of a bust. And he was sunny side up as well, and he got stuck. I was very
mm,
close to C-section with him. I had like four doctors trying to, manually turn him. It was just awful. And
mm,
like my nurse was fantastic. She stayed with me and didn't give up on me. She's like, try this, try that, because third child, I really didn't want a C-section.
mm,
Um, she was just, and you're in labor and all you want to do is like, squat in fetal position or be in a certain way. And she's like, no, try this way, try over here. So it was awful.
Mm,
But it worked. He eventually, turned and got him out, and everybody was fine. But he
yeah.
was he was the worst out of the three.
Mm,
It was just yeah, just the doctors coming in and trying to move him. Again, my husband gave me that look like I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna
mm,
stand here and hold your hand, and that's it.
yeah. Yeah. So, you were unmedicated for the first two. The
Hmm.
third, you were medicated, but it didn't take effect.
Yeah,
It didn't feel.
I had one contraction where I was like, oh, that's what that's like. This is glorious.
Uh-huh.
And then that was it.
Okay. Oh, wow. And did you have IV drip or anything with any of them?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Wow. And so then, what was the immediate postpartum time like? Where did you get that? Was the baby handed directly to you?
Yes.
Were
I
they
was
weighed immediately? What was that like?
I was ready, I was adamant that I wanted them all three on my chest immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know if I said it at any point or if the hospitals just did it, but all
Mm-hmm.
three went immediately onto my chest, skin to
Mm-hmm.
skin. And, we had those, I, I don't know how long it was anymore, but we had that time immediately on my chest. And
Mm-hmm.
then that's where, they cut the cord and all that stuff and they give you that time. And then to be weighed and cleaned up and all those things.
Mm-hmm. And you said you don't remember how long it was, but was it 20 minutes, an hour, longer than an hour that you got to have that snuggly time? Do you
It was
remember?
it was probably closer to the 20 minutes
Okay.
because
Yeah.
then they do all the cleaning and they do all that and then they all gave me back my baby and then they left. They're like, "Were you?"
Okay.
I want to say all three. I had like probably a good hour in the room, just me, my
Okay.
husband, and the baby. And then they
Okay.
would come back and be like, "Okay, now we're gonna move you, to your actual room for the next few days."
Okay. And do you remember the very first feed or the very first latch with your babies?
Um, which one of them did like I think it was my first. She did the mouth open kind of head searching thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you try to put her on right away. But and the other ones I don't really remember, but I knew at that point, they're gonna need to eat, or at least try to get it started soon.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I gave them the time or if I just kind of did it quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with your first, you think it was with the first, she did the head bobbing and finding the breast.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit about what that was like? Did you experience pain right away? You said that your first breastfeeding experience was very painful. Was it painful from the get go, or did it take a little while for it to be
No,
painful?
it took a few days because I remember thinking, "Oh, I got this." It's another one of
Mm,
those moments in motherhood where you think you've got it figured out and you're
right,
horribly wrong.
right.
Like we left the hospital and we were feeling good. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
ready. Like we can go home. We got this. The nursing wasn't
Mm-hmm.
hurting. I was like, it's okay. And then like a day or two later, it started to really.
Yeah. Um, and did you get any support in the hospital with breastfeeding with any of your babies? Did somebody come
They
in and offer
Somebody
to
came
help?
in. They offered all three times. The first time was the one time I was like, yes, please come in and check that I'm doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
The other two times, I think I told them that I was all set.
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
I was confident at that point. At least I
mhm.
knew what it should look like. So if
Yeah,
she or if either of them weren't latching, I knew at least pop them off and try again, as opposed to
yeah,
just letting them keep going.
right.
So the first time I definitely, yeah, they definitely did help and help me position and do all that stuff.
And what was that experience like? Was it the same person? Was it one time, multiple times?
I
Um,
want to say it was a couple of times,
mhm.
like one initial checkup, and then how are you doing? Kind of like follow up.
Okay. And did it feel supportive? Did it feel like you were getting the help you needed?
Yeah, it seems like even when they're explaining it, it didn't seem like there was that much to it.
Uh-huh.
It's really just, position that look like a fish, that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay,
Okay.
we'll just keep trying. We're going to have plenty of opportunities to keep trying.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay. So then you go home, particularly with your first, you go home, you feel like I've got this, we're doing this.
mhm.
And then at some point, you're feeling like I don't have this. We're not
Yes,
doing this. Tell
yes.
me about that.
This is not how it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say yeah. Within a few days, it was like you're in pain, like taking a shower hurts, all that kind of stuff, and you
Okay.
start to get tired, and it just hormones, it all kind of hits you, and it was just this this is not how I thought it was going to go, and but if you don't if you're not doing it picture perfect 100%, then you're failing
Right.
to me, and
Yeah. And
which
so
again experience.
what were you so it was within a couple of days that it started to feel that way.
Yeah.
Um was were you have did you have a checkup at the pediatrician within those couple of days?
Yeah. And I mean, her growth was fine. She was doing
Okay.
fine.
Okay. So she was fine, but you were not.
Yes. And even
Okay.
when even when I was in pain and I did have a lactation consultant come to the house, like they do the way before and the way after the feeding. And
Mm-hmm.
even then, like she was fine. She had eaten enough, but I was just in so much pain.
Yeah. So what was that like? What was the feedback you were given when baby was growing, but
So
you were
they
in intense pain?
they actually mentioned the tongue and lip tie, which was the first I had heard of that. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, you should take her to get checked out. It looks like, she has a tongue and lip tie, and that could be where your pain is coming from because she's eating. Like, she's still growing. She was fine. It was
Mm-hmm.
me that was, she would cry to eat, and I would, start to get upset because I knew it was going to hurt, and I
Mm,
didn't want to do it, and I didn't want that to be our relationship.
mm. Yeah, you're so in the thick of it then. It all gets tied to whether or not you're a good mother in
Right. And then, like,
that moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
if I give her a bottle, is she going to reject the breast? And it's just, all those things just are all right there.
And was this an IBCLC that came to the house?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you find out about it, Lisa?
I don't remember. I want to say just like website searches because it wasn't covered by my insurance.
It was not. So you
It was
paid
not.
fully out of pocket?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's why we were hesitant to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, new baby
So
expenses
there was no
anyway.
reimbursement or anything from your
No,
insurance? Okay.
no, not at that time
Yeah.
anyway. I don't know if it would be now. Um,
Yeah. 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 So you found somebody online. How many times did they come to the house? Just once?
I think just once, but
Mm-hmm.
we ended up, bringing her to get her tongue and lip tie fixed, and I gave her maybe like a day's worth of formula just so I could heal, and we were fine
Mm-hmm.
after that.
Okay. And where did you go to get the tongue and lip tie
We went
evaluated?
to, it wasn't, they did it with a laser. It was like a pediatric dentist, I think,
Okay. Okay.
and it
And
was,
the IBCLC that came to your house, did they Did they evaluate the tongue and lip tie themselves? Like do a check inside the mouth, or did they just say you need to go somewhere to get it evaluated and diagnosed?
No. You know what it was? They evaluated and they gave me some names and said check with your insurance if they're covered.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Okay. Okay.
So they did give me the information.
Okay. So, um, baby's growing. You're in intense pain. Was there any damage to your nipple,
No,
or breast tissue?
no, everything healed and, even just like that day or so of recovery, it was all, it was all fine.
Yeah. So
It was
you were
more
not,
traumatic to, my psyche than anything.
yeah, of course. Yeah. Um, you said it healed. So before it healed, were there cracks? Was there bleeding? Was there visible?
Yeah, yeah, there was
Okay.
cracks and some bleeding.
Okay. And did you have a pump? Were you
Yes,
provided a pump through
yep,
insurance?
yes,
Okay.
I was.
Okay. And were you doing any pumping to relieve instead, and feeding milk in another way to try to heal up, or was it all breastfeeding all the time?
No, I finally listened to my husband for at least a few feedings, and
Uh-huh.
I did pump, and he tried to give the bottles. It was okay. She took it okay.
Yeah, yeah. And then you said once the tongue and lip tie were um, released, you did do some formula
Hmm.
um, so that you could heal up. What was that experience like for you?
Um, Again, at first it was like failing at first,
Mm,
but then once I started to feel better and I started to feel more like I could do it again, like I just needed a little break
mm-hmm,
and came back and it was fine. And like
mm-hmm,
meanwhile, after the tongue and lip tie, you have to stretch so it doesn't heal together again. So
mm-hmm,
like you have to do those stretches like 3 times a day, and the baby's screaming, and it's just
mm-hmm.
it's I can look back and now obviously it wasn't that big of a deal, but at the time, making your child scream for 3 times a day just it felt awful.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, so you're doing the stretches, and it was just about one day that you switched to bottle feeding. Did you also remove milk with the pump at that time to make sure you didn't get engorged or maintain your
Yeah.
supply?
So
Okay.
I think we did the formula just until I had enough milk to
Uh-huh.
to feed her.
Okay.
So like
Okay.
to give
And
my
then,
because I didn't have anything obviously pumped and stored in the
yeah.
freezer. So
And then you did some combination of feeding breast milk and nursing while you continued to heal up.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so what happened after that? Did you feel reduced pain after the release of the tongue and lip tie?
I did. Yeah. After that, it was. I mean, aside from a couple clogged ducts here and there, like it was pretty smooth sailing. Like we got the hang of it, and it was fine after that.
Okay, so once the tongue tie was resolved, the nursing felt better. Can you talk to me a little bit then about at that point how you grew in confidence and knew that your baby was transferring milk and began to start to feel normal in your new relationship with your baby and breastfeeding? Both
I
with the first, and you can also talk about your experiences with the other two.
I would say after the 6 week mark, it started to feel better. Like I definitely had some baby blues up until then, and it took a good 6 weeks, I think, to kind of like come out of that and come back and be like, okay, she is, growing. She is, when they start to at least, you know, are awake for a little bit longer. It's not just, feed, sleep,
Mm-hmm.
poop, repeat. Like it's a
Right.
little bit more than that. Um,
Yeah.
and you really start to, it took me a little while to really feel like that love and attachment. It wasn't immediate, which
Mhm.
again makes you, feel like a terrible mother.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
it just hits you and it's overwhelming. It's a feeling you've
Y-
never had before.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
when that hit, it was like, okay, we're here, we're okay, and we're gonna do it, and it's gonna be all right.
Yeah, it's amazing how so many of those feelings are tied to feeding, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Like you're taking care of this baby because you know you have to, but once you kind of you're getting a little more comfortable and you just let kind of the positive feelings come in a little bit.
Mhm.
It was kind of a game changer.
Mhm. And would you say it was about the 6-week mark with all three of your kids where it started to feel really comfortable and, um, normal, like you had found your stride with breastfeeding, or did it happen at different times for
I
the
think the
different?
breastfeeding was earlier for each of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like both of the other ones too have tongue and lip ties that we didn't get
Mm,
fixed.
mm,
But the feeding was easier for the other two definitely. But it still
okay.
took probably a good 4 to 5 weeks for me to get into that like you know happy, comfortable feeling.
Yeah.
My second was I had it, but we were just so tired. She just screamed for 15 months. She was just she was a really hard baby,
Mm,
and she
mm-hmm.
kind of took a toll. Um, but even still, like around that, still around that like 6 week mark or so, it had that you felt like that flood of emotion. And
Yeah.
at least that time I knew it was coming. Like the first one, I thought I would have it the second she was born.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I thought there was something wrong with me. But the other two, I knew it would happen when I was ready.
Right. Yeah. So you knew to expect that there might be a little delay in that sense of I'm this child's mother and I love this child to pieces.
Right.
And I'm not only going to care for this child because I have to, but because we have this deep and amazing bond.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And I think, yeah, nursing, um, I'm not sure what I want to say there. But yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and so you mentioned earlier on your partner is your husband, correct?
Yes.
You okay? And you mentioned that he at times would give you that look like a deer in the headlights, like I don't know how to help.
Yes.
But would you? How did you? What was his level of support while you were navigating breastfeeding? Both the challenges and the growth curve. Um, what was that like?
He was very supportive. He was kind of like what do you need me to do? What can I do to help?
Mhm.
Which is it's great, but when I don't know what that thing is, it's tough.
Mhm. Right.
I don't know. He wanted so desperately to help and to be able to fix the situation, and I had nothing to give him.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
knew he was there for support, but it was futile.
Yeah. And what about other family members? What about your mom? Is she in the area? Is she local? Was she able to provide support, although she had not breastfed you? Was she
um,
able to?
Advice wise, she's a little more old school,
Mhm.
so that was trickier.
Mhm.
But when I did have kind of a moment around 6 weeks where I was just kind of broke a little, she did
Mhm.
come and stay for a couple days
Mhm.
so that I could at least, not have to hold the baby all the time. Like I got a little more rest and, made us a little food and stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Just lightened your load in other ways.
Yeah, just so I could kind of help me kind of reset and start fresh or
Yeah.
fresher, I guess.
Right. And what about your pediatrician? or the
I
family doctor?
so it was a different pediatrician than we have now. I did love her though, because she was a new mom herself,
Mm.
so she
Mhm.
was completely understanding. And
Yeah.
and again, even if she didn't, have an answer, because it's emotional support isn't, there may not be an answer. Um, she was still, there and listened and was like, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you feel like she had evidence-based advice for you regarding breastfeeding, or that's really not what you were looking for?
Um, Honestly, I don't remember, because she would. I do remember her saying, like, you know, you know, this is what we recommend, blah blah blah, and then she'd be like, do what is best, do what you
Mhm.
need to do.
Mhm.
And again, I think that was a lot. I think a lot of it was her new, like she had just come back to work, like so she was
Yeah.
new mom. And she was like,
Yeah.
I know I'm gonna say, X, Y, and Z is what you should do, but you do what you need
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you work before you had your children?
Yes.
Were you working? And
Yeah.
what was your decision while you were pregnant in
um,
regards to returning to work?
I After my first, I was determined to come back, and I ended up
Hmm.
taking, I think, 2 weeks extra maternity. But she was born in September, so like I would have come back right around the holidays, and no one was
Hmm.
there. Like, I'm just gonna take a couple extra weeks. And then I came back, and my second day back, I told my boss I was quitting.
Wow.
I was like,
Yeah.
nope, I can't do this. We're done.
Yeah.
And he was fantastic. He's like, you know what? Why don't we try part time?
Yeah.
Why don't we give this a try for a few weeks? And if you really can't do it, we don't want you to go, but we understand. And I
Yeah.
ended up doing the part time thing, and it worked.
Okay.
So I stayed doing that.
Okay. So how did you navigate? Did you have to pump while you were at work, or did you work your hours around
I
feeding?
did have to pump. I think I
Okay.
pumped at that point. I think maybe two or three times, because I think it was three times because I went to 10-hour days.
Okay. Okay. So you would work a couple of 10-hour days throughout the week?
Yeah. So I would feed before I left early, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and then three pumps at work, and then yeah.
Yeah. And how was your milk supply while you pumped?
For the first one, it was actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I was pretty fortunate that
Yeah.
I had so much extra that I was actually able to donate.
Oh, wow. And who did
Um,
you donate to? Did you donate to an organization or
I did,
uh,
like the Milk Bank of the Northeast,
yeah.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
And
I
what was
was.
that process like?
It was pretty simple. You request the information, they set up a blood draw just to
Mm-hmm.
text you, and then they give you, like, they mail you the box, and I don't remember if they gave you packing material or if it was just newspaper, and that was it. They, like, give you a self-addressed envelope and everything, and you just pack it up and schedule it,
Wow.
and you're done. It was pretty
And it has
simple.
dry ice in it, the envelope. It,
Yeah, or they had gave you ice packs, or there was something.
oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it
And
was
then
a
you
pretty
would,
simple process.
yeah, yeah, that is so great. And so you were pumping at work. Did you receive any instruction about pumping, about best practices with pumping? How did you figure out the best way to go about pumping?
Um, I'm It wasn't, I don't remember really getting instruction. And the first time that I did it, was when my daughter was a few days old, and I was frantic because I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't planned on it. Nothing was cleaned. All the
Mm-hmm.
bottles were still in their package. Um, so by that point, like, I had pumped, for a few weeks before I went back to work. Um, and I had a little room at work, and it was fine. Um, but I don't remember getting instruction. I think just looking at the instructions that came with the pump was kind of
Okay.
it. and like all the
Yeah.
bottles come with their sterilization stuff. Like it seemed very overwhelming the first time I had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And were there other people in your workplace that had pumped before or that were pumping?
There was one other that we had been pregnant at the same time, so I don't remember who had the baby first. I think I had the baby first. So then we ended up, but I was, yeah. So we did end up needing the room at the same time, but her schedule was a little different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
She still worked 5 days when she came back,
Yeah.
so she didn't need to pump quite as often.
Yeah. So, was that nice? Did it feel supportive, or did it feel like, now we're competing for the same resources of a pumping space and trying to coordinate schedules?
I don't remember it being that bad, like that
Mm-hmm.
part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we would eat like at my schedule was more flexible, so I would eat
Mm-hmm.
at different times, and it wasn't too bad. It would just be like, hey, I'm going to use the room, at this time today, and okay, I need it at this time. Like it wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. And so, you told me at the beginning that your goals were originally 6 weeks, and then after that, 6 months,
Hmm.
and then a year. You also said that you ended up feeding your children to about 18 months or a year, each of them. Is that right? Or 2 years?
Um, 18 months, over 2 years for the last two.
Okay. All right. So you met your goals.
Hmm.
At what point um, did you think, oh, wow, did it become a thing where you just weren't even thinking about it anymore? Like, this is just what we do?
Yeah. I feel like I hit that point years ago. And after about 18 months or so, it's only once before bed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like,
Okay.
it's not taking over my whole day, stop and
And
feed.
is that something that you worked towards, or did that naturally happen between you and your kids?
I think it, now it was kind of the goal after the first, like when I made the decision to like think about stopping,
Mm-hmm.
it just, I thought was going to be the hardest one to drop.
Mm-hmm.
So I left it for last.
Mm-hmm. The
And
nighttime feed. Because do they
yeah,
do they nurse to go to sleep?
um, the first two did.
Okay.
So I just envisioned it was going to be, kind of a struggle. So I just left
Right.
it for last because I thought it was going to be the hardest, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And
Exactly.
then it worked out well. Like it gave me, the whole day I didn't have to, you know, think about it, and it was just at bedtime, and that was fine. So that's how I ended
Mm-hmm.
up weaning my second, and yeah, my third eventually. When he showed less interest, I just keep the one at nighttime. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
easiest to do for me, really.
Yeah, yeah. So as they got older, when they asked at other times of the day, what have you done to try to push it off until that nighttime feed?
They never really did.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Okay.
we always kind of had a set schedule earlier
Mm-hmm.
on, especially as they get older, they'd like and started eating food. It would be like first thing in the morning, and then nap time, and then bedtime. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was always kind of set. I never when only when they were little did I ever really nurse if they cried. Like
Okay.
once they were big enough to eat and kind of just be a little bit more become their own little person. They just never really did ask, so we just kept it at
Yeah.
that schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. And what were nights like in your house in those early days, and then as they have grown? Tell me about feeding at night. What did that look like in your family?
It I mean the nursing was always easier, and when I stopped my husband started doing it, he would give them, the first it was the bottle, give them a little bottle of like regular milk, and he would sit there so they wouldn't ask for it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but they all made the transition pretty well. Like, again, I was fortunate they didn't really fight it, not for more than like a week or so.
Yeah.
I think my third has fought us taking away the pacifier more than any of them fought stopping nighttime feeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in those very early days when they were still itty bitty infants, what did nighttime look like?
Oh, it that was different. That is more of like um, everybody kind of, my husband and I kind of rushing and doing all the things that we needed to do so that like,
Mm-hmm.
I would feed and I would rest first.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would stay up with the baby, until I think up until around like 11 o'clock or so was his time, 11 to midnight.
Okay.
Like, so
Okay.
he would stay up, and if they needed to be held, he would hold them, especially my second, who just screamed continuously. Like, we
Okay.
would, at bedtime, we'd get the oldest down, and I would rush to, get the bottles, get everything ready that we needed for the next day, and then go to bed. And he would
Okay.
stay up and just wake me up to feed, and I would go back to sleep. And then around,
Mm-hmm.
the 1 o'clock time, we would switch so that he could go to sleep before work. And then I
Mm-hmm.
was the one in charge of the baby, you know, until he came home for the day. She was tough.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, were they in your room? Were they in their own rooms? Where were they sleeping when they slept in between
My
feeding?
my oldest was in our room till till about 4 months. She was
Okay.
a good sleeper.
Uh-huh.
Um, my middle daughter, she was supposed to share a room with my oldest, but because of her screaming, we kind of put it off until
Yeah.
closer to 7 months,
Mm-hmm.
and then she went into their shared room, and even that, like, she wasn't in there a ton because she just needed to be held all the time. But there
Yeah.
were there were many a night where my husband or I slept in there or in her crib or when she was a little
Uh-huh.
older, and it was
Yeah. And did you ever, did you ever get any answers about the screaming? Was it just temperamental? In looking back, do you have any ideas about what that could have been? Did you go down any rabbit holes trying to figure out the cause?
I did. I felt like I went kind of down is it my diet? Should I cut out dairy? Should I do X, Y,
Uh-huh.
and Z? Am I drinking too much
Yeah.
coffee? And at the end of it, it was just kind of like, she'll stop when she's ready.
Yeah.
She just is who she is already.
Right.
It'll
Yeah.
serve her well later in life, but right now it's painful.
Right. Yeah.
And one
Yeah.
day she just stopped. That was it.
Right. Yeah. So how long did that last?
It She did that for 15 months,
Okay.
and then she was fine. And she's still the one that gets up most out
Uh-huh.
of all three, but it's
Yeah.
obviously nothing like it was before.
Right. But she's a spitfire still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, she is. Yeah, she is her own person.
And what was breastfeeding like for her? What would she pop off the breast and cry, or if she was feeding, she was fine? It was the in between times.
No, she would pop off and cry.
Uh-huh.
She would just be. She was just more difficult for everything all
Yeah.
around.
But her growth was fine. There were no
Hmm.
concerns about.
Yep, yep, all of
Yeah.
that was fine.
Yeah. And did you ever seek out support of an IBCLC as you went down the rabbit holes? Or,
Not for her,
uh-huh,
because she was eating and growing. She was huge. She was like 97th percentile.
uh-huh.
Like, I was never concerned about her growth.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
we never really figured it out. But once she did stop doing all that, she got a fever a few weeks later and had a febrile seizure. So she
Oh, wow.
caused me concern and other issues. but the screaming
Yeah.
stopped.
Right. Yeah. 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 And she was still nursing at that time when
Yeah.
she
So
started
I
screaming.
ended up nursing her longer because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was that why were there other issues that caused that, or it was like a viral fever?
That one was just viral, but she ended up having, I mean, she had a few just from regular colds, but one of them ended up being from a UTI, and it turned out she had kidney reflux. Hold on a second. What is?
So at that time, the seizure, it was a viral seizure
Yes.
caused caused by a UTI. You said.
Yeah. Yeah, it was caused by a UTI. They did a check at the ER and recommended that we see a urologist.
Okay.
So we did, and it ended up she had some kidney reflux and was put on antibiotics for 2 years. It ended up being,
Oh
um,
wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it could cause another seizure.
Yeah. So did did they ever discuss whether or not that could have been connected to the just her discomfort for the first 15 months of her life?
It never really came up.
Hmm.
Even when she had it, she was didn't seem uncomfortable. She didn't seem bothered by it.
Hmm.
She never said
Okay.
ow or had a hard
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's so hard to know when our babies are so little,
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's that's I think that's at the crux of what you were talking about in the beginning when we start to doubt our capabilities as mothers, as parents,
yeah,
because
and
we want so badly to help our children, and sometimes we don't know the exact right thing to do,
yeah.
and then we start to doubt.
Right,
Um,
because you feel like you should. It's your kid. You should know how
mhm,
to comfort your child.
right.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Any other differences between the second and the third in those early days of breastfeeding, as you were getting settled? I know you mentioned you had you used an SNS, a tube with the third, with your
it
son?
was, yeah, it was. We did get it from the doctor, but it was, yeah, he was just not. His diapers were dry for too long when he was a
Mm-hmm.
newborn, so
Uh-huh.
they and my milk just hadn't come in.
Okay. And that
Yeah,
was
it
by
took
day what?
4. I want to say day
Okay.
4. And they were
Uh-huh.
like, if he doesn't have a wet diaper by, I think it was like 7 o'clock at night, it was like take him to the
Okay.
emergency room. Like we were packing a bag and just checked his diaper one last time, and it was finally wet.
Oh, wow.
But we were giving him, yeah, I don't remember how much it was in the syringe and stuff. But we were definitely giving
Yeah.
him formula to supplement at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And were you pumping additionally to try to get your milk
Oh,
going?
I was trying, but it was really nothing.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah, so by day 4, so you were getting like maybe drops of colostrum
yeah,
or
yeah.
uh-huh.
And I knew it
Eh,
would take about 5 to 6 days because that's what it took for all three.
Okay.
But
But
he
for
just
some
didn't.
reason it was just really impacting your son.
Yeah,
Yeah. I bet that was scary to be told that you had to pack him up and take him to the ER.
yeah, it was, yeah, not the best. When we didn't have to go, it was a huge weight lesson.
Yeah. And that was 2 years ago, so that was in the middle of the pandemic, the
It
start of
was
the pandemic.
it was just before he was born in December.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, no, it was just before.
Yeah, so with him, he had had that difficult birth,
Mhm.
where he almost got stuck. You still got to hold him immediately,
Yeah.
um, and nurse him immediately as well.
Yeah. Immediate
Okay,
enough, I think.
yeah, yeah. And then how many days were you in the hospital? When did you go home?
I think we for the second and third we left the hospital a day early because we had other kids
Okay,
at home
yeah,
and we felt comfortable that we could do it and everybody was healthy. So we had also, been in there at like just after the cutoff time.
Mhm.
So it was leaving a day early, but it didn't really feel like it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so you get home, and was he nursing okay? Nursing around the clock? Was he sleepy? Um,
Yeah, he was more of the typical baby. I think he did
mhm.
a lot more eating and sleeping when he was little.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, but you were noticing he wasn't peeing and pooping, or the pediatrician noticed at a checkup. How did that come about?
I noticed, and then I just asked, like, how often, my milk isn't really come in. How often should he have, wet diapers and all that stuff?
Mm,
And because she would
mhm.
ask, are you having, X amount of wet diapers a day? And no, well, what
Mhm.
should we be doing? And kind of thing.
Mhm. And so then the pediatrician gave you an SNS tube,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you would put drops of formula in the tube and nurse at the breast simultaneously.
Um,
How did you?
I don't remember.
Mhm.
I want
Or
to say,
from the finger?
yeah, I want to say that.
Uh-huh.
Um, I don't feel like I nursed him when he had the tube in, because that would have just made it more difficult.
Okay. Okay. So it was separate from your feedings at the
Yeah,
breast.
yeah. I think I would
Okay.
try. I think I would try to nurse him first,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and then give him the little tube.
Okay. And then you would pump on top of that.
I only tried pumping like a couple of times
Okay.
just to see if I could help speed it along. But when it
Okay.
wasn't working, like we just had, the two other kids, and it was just
I
if it
know.
wasn't
Yeah.
working, it was just too much.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And then when did your milk finally, when did your mature milk finally come in? When
Six
did you
days.
notice? At what day?
6 days?
6 days.
Yeah.
Okay. So by day six, you finally noticed your supply coming in. And then was there a turnaround? Was he ingesting enough milk at that time? What was that like?
Yeah, I think they had said there was something like if there was like 3 days that he had X amount of wet diapers, like I could stop the formula.
Okay.
So once we hit that benchmark, and I knew my milk was
Okay.
in, like we stopped.
Okay. And so you never used a bottle in those early days of formula with him. You always used the syringe with the
Correct.
tube.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So a very gentle approach to adding in supplementation.
Yeah.
Just enough.
Mhm.
Yeah. And were you worried? How were you feeling emotionally? I know you said those first 6 weeks have been typically kind of hard for you.
Yeah, it was different in the sense that I didn't, feel badly about giving him formula. Like he needed it.
Okay.
I didn't
Okay.
feel guilty about that, but I felt a little of that, like he's my son, I should be able to feed him.
Mm,
Like I was
mm-hmm.
frustrated that, it wasn't my milk wasn't in yet, and obviously I
Mm.
couldn't control that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't
And
feel bad about the formula though.
were you in touch with your gynecologist as well, letting them know that your milk wasn't coming in, or you just knew, like, you weren't were you feeling any symptoms yourself physically that might
No,
indicate you needed a checkup?
no, I didn't see my gynecologist. I don't even think I called because I knew like it was going to be around 5 days.
Okay.
And I just assumed it would be fine because
Yeah.
the other kids were fine.
Yeah. 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 Um, and it was. And so as soon as he hit the mark with enough wet diapers, you stopped the formula supplementation, and then breastfeeding took off for him.
Yeah, he was
Okay.
he was always on the smaller side,
Mm-hmm.
but he was fine.
Okay.
Whereas the girls are always, in the 90s for all their percentiles. He was much smaller.
Yeah. 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 And then was it about the same thing around the 6 week mark? You felt
Um,
normal. You felt like you had hit your stride.
yeah, it might even have been. Yeah, it was probably around there because at
Yeah.
that point, my husband's back at work and I had the oldest in preschool. Like, kind of whether I was feeling okay or not, like this is where we are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, I would love to know what was the worst advice you got in regards to breastfeeding or feeding your babies in general.
Um, I never really liked the. I don't know if this counts as breastfeeding, but I never really liked the sleep when your baby sleeps advice.
Mm.
I
Mm-hmm.
I cannot do it. I it like the
Yeah.
baby might sleep for 10 minutes, so I close my eyes for 10 minutes, and then I wake up angry that I only slept for 10 minutes. Like it was just
Right. Yeah.
no. I just want to sit up and just enjoy the quiet. Like why do I have to sleep at this moment? It's
Right.
not
Yeah.
working.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So just permission to do whatever you want to do in those 10 minutes. If
Yeah,
that's sleep, then sleep. But if
yeah,
that's stare at a wall, then stare at a wall.
yeah. I don't need to be on a schedule. Just
Right.
just let me be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And then what about the best advice you received?
Um, just that there will come a moment when you just want to give up and you feel like you can't do it. And everybody has that moment. And it's okay. If you need to reach out, and you will get past it.
Hmm.
But whether everybody wants to talk about it or post their, perfect pictures or how their baby is sleeping through the night at, 4 weeks, like you do you. Every baby
Hmm.
is different
Hmm.
and they will get there when they're ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And were there any resources that you turned to in those early baby feeding days or in the times when it was hard that really helped you?
Um, at that time, I was still pretty isolated.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I just kind of had that one friend that I called a few times, just
Okay.
to vent.
Yeah. So
And
reaching out to a real life person who was a good listener
yeah,
for
someone that I knew
emotions.
wouldn't judge me.
Yeah. Yeah. So important.
Yeah, and I really try to be that person to any other friend because I know like
Yeah.
you're gonna feel all these things that you good or bad that you never thought you would feel before, and you need
Yeah.
to have somewhere to safely let those out.
Exactly.
Like if you need to put the baby down because they're screaming in your face, go put the baby down.
Right.
The baby will be
Yeah.
fine. You take care of yourself too.
Exactly.
You are still important.
Right. Yes, you are. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your stories. I think so many people will relate, and especially to that idea of, oh, wait, I was supposed to feel this immediate love and bonding to my baby, and I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
Um, And, I hear about half and half. I hear half of people say it was magical and I felt it right away. And then the other half of people I talk to say it took a while.
Yeah.
It came, but it took a while.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to normalize all the feelings that are out there because they're all okay. And we're all still taking care of our babies and our children in the best way we know how.
Exactly. We're all just doing our best.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Milk Making Minutes. I hope you found connection and feel supported wherever you are in your baby feeding journey. The views expressed in each interview are deeply personal and sacred, and I'm so grateful to each person who was generous enough to share their story. It is also true that those views are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect my opinion or advice as a lactation supporter, and this podcast does not qualify as medical advice. If you are struggling to feed your baby, please seek out the support of a local IBCLC.